following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Every day, citizens around the country are faced with new dilemmas. Dilemmas that affect them profoundly. Whether it's injustice, discrimination, falling through the cracks, scandals and cronyism, balances of power, ethics, religious freedoms, state versus citizens, and unfunded mandates, and the list goes on and on and on. Welcome to Speak Up. It's directed at those who have fallen through the cracks, and it gives them a voice. It's your turn to speak up. To stand up and fight back. Welcome to this edition of Speak Up. Today, we are going to be joined with Dr. Susan Cornbluth, and she is a psychologist, an author, an expert on foster care and parenting. And I want to welcome you to the show, Dr. Sue. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me on tonight.
As you know, we've been doing a number of speak-ups on parental alienation, and one of the reasons we wanted you is because you're an expert in this particular syndrome. We had recently Linda Gottlieb on the show, and she is an expert as well. We've had Sue and Ron, Sherry and Ron Palmer, who wrote the book Not in the Child's Best Interest. And I thought this was just a local problem, but as we've reached out to other states, we've learned that this is a national epidemic. Can you tell us a little bit about your perspective on parental alienation?
Yes, you're absolutely right. This has become a national problem across this country. I hear from parents every day asking for help, desperate to find somebody that will listen to their story about what is occurring with their child, with their spouse. Help me, please help me. You know, Kevin, the thing is that parent alienation syndrome is really about one parent wanting to hurt the other parent. Right. And what ends up happening is that the other parent gets hurt, but the child is the one that is getting hurt the most.
That child's rights are getting trampled on just as the other parent's rights are, from what I understand.
Yeah.
You know, I was going through some of your webpage, and I was noticing how that some parents do use this as a weapon, and if they strike first, don't the courts get it? Don't they understand? Or what is going on?
I know, and you know, that is so hard for me to understand as well. And a lot of times I'll even go into court myself. I do a lot of custody evaluations and psychological evaluations on children and adults, and the information will be presented right in front of these judges. And the judges are still siding with the other parents that is actually doing the alienation. I cannot figure it out myself, but what I think is that the courts do not understand exactly what parent alienation syndrome is. And what it really is child abuse.
Correct. Right, and it is not in the child's best interest. So when you're handing the judge, you know, you've got your credentials, you've got your education, you've had the years put into this, you're an expert on this whole topic. You give an expert testimony, and they're not listening to it. Is it what they don't want to hear, or are they just not taking the time to look at the evidence?
That's a great question. My answer to that is that I think that the courts and a lot of these family court judges, they just have the mentality that they do not want to take sides against one parent against the other. And so therefore they rather see the parents work together oftentimes to parent the child. But what ends up happening then is if one of the parents has a vendetta against the other parent, sometimes the parent will brainwash the child
Right.
to stay away from the other parent. And what ends up happening there is that the healthy parent is the one that gets destroyed. And the child then becomes a part of that in destroying the healthy parent.
Financially, emotionally, the whole works. And of course, what greater harm can you do to somebody than to take their child away? We've heard many stories where men have lost their, and women, it goes across the
Yes.
board. It's both. But we've discovered that men are, everybody's losing their homes, they're losing their finances, they're losing their reputation. And it's like the last straw. How dare you take my child away?
Well, it's exactly right. And, I hear every day from people the stories about how they've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars fighting to get custody of their child when they've done nothing wrong.
And who's getting that money? It's not going to the child. It's not going to the child's best
No.
interest. Who's
It's
absorbing?
going to the lawyers, paying some of these lawyers that do not know exactly how to defend their client, how to protect the child's best interest. Custody law is very specific, and not every lawyer knows how to work with cases like this. You have to be aware of the cases that your lawyer has fought for, the cases that your lawyer has won. I think one of the main things is that you should definitely have a family lawyer. And I've seen many people that go into court with litigators, all different kinds of lawyers, but that's not what you need when you're fighting a custody case. And so the money is going to lawyers that don't know what they're doing. And I'm not saying it's everyone. I would never say that. There's some very good lawyers out there.
According to Ron and Sherry, it seems as though when parents end up going into the custody battles, that they're starting off on the wrong foot. They're not arguing that this is a constitutional issue, that when people are standing before a judge, that you've got to remember, just because you're getting divorced, it doesn't mean you've divorced your constitutional rights and the right of due process, the 14th Amendment. I'm curious, because my viewers are just learning of you, could you tell us a little bit about your background and how long you've been doing this and where you were educated?
Sure, I'd be glad to. So I started out about 15 to 20 years ago working in the foster care system. I was actually an outpatient therapist for foster children, and I did a lot of evaluations for the courts and would testify here in Philadelphia. And what I was seeing in these courts was that a lot of corruption was going on, and kids were being placed back with their abusers, and I could not understand why that was happening. So I started to do some of my own research on my own and team up with people that really had the child's best interest at heart. Look, family court judges, they're not psychologists. They don't understand what a child goes through when they're being brainwashed by another parent or being coached or things like that. So that was one avenue. So I thought I could really use my voice to make change for these children and be the child's voice and be the voice for the parents that wanted to adopt these children. And I was very successful in the Philadelphia court system. I would write a report, I would testify, and most of the children were reunited with the parent that was not abusing them. I then went on to teach and train mental health professionals on how to work with families that were going through custody. But my work really centers around healing children and families from trauma. And also that you don't need to give up your fight. There are other ways when you feel depleted and you can't go on and you think the court has gotten you. They don't all the time. There are other things that you can do. Sometimes you can get a new judge to come in and hear your case. But the main thing is where my work is that I'm interested in helping parents and children move beyond trauma. And the courts, unfortunately, are one of the people that are causing such trauma for families and children today.
Yeah, we've actually, as a former state representative, legislator, I sat on a committee called the Redress of Grievance Committee. And we've actually determined in that committee, even before I ever heard of parental alienation, I think it was in the Johnson case and the Youssef case, Petition 5, and I forget the Youssef, I think he's 18. However, we determined that the courts were actually guilty of child abuse in that they were separating a parent that was not adjudicated as unfit or harmful, and that is the burden of the courts constitutionally. And they were taking the child away and using, they would start the clock when the divorce started, and it seems as though the money would be calculating, and then all of a sudden, 6 months down the road, they'd have this big bill. Now you're in the arrears and you're a deadbeat, even though you've been paying the rent, you've been doing all these things to continue to try to make the equilibrium in the family while it was actually truly being torn apart.
Yeah.
And so we discovered that, and we actually put it in the New Hampshire House calendar. Nobody's acted upon it, and I don't understand that, but I became acutely aware. We had at least 28 family court cases. And then, of course, we had a situation where people were actually saying, you know, the committee is a kangaroo court. Well, wait a minute. We spent hours and hours looking at documentations of families being hurt, children saying, I want to see my mommy, I want to see my daddy. And then what do you do with that type of, how do you start treating a child? How do you start treating a family that's gone through that? What do you start saying to them?
Well, first of all, what you say is, the first thing I always say is, don't stop fighting. And do not stop fighting for your child, because the minute that you give up on your child is the minute that the second that the child needs more help than ever, because that child who is being abused by the alienator, and Kevin, let's be clear here. What the alienator really is, in my mind, from a psychological perspective, is a sociopath.
Now, you're a psychologist, so you can say that. You have the clinical right to say that.
And I will say it again. What an alienating parent is a sociopath. A sociopath is someone that is manipulative, that is charming, that is cons people, and if they can con adults, they can certainly con children. So what I say to parents is that there is always hope. That's why you keep fighting, because when you get your child back, and I believe that, I've seen it, in the end, that many of the healthy parents have been reunited with their children. And when you get a child back from an alienating parent, look, there's no question in my mind, they need help right away, and lots of it. And what you do as a parent is you put your child first, as you have the whole time in this fight. And you keep working with the child. You get the best help that you can. And children can heal from such abuse from an alienator. It takes time, though, but it can happen with unconditional love by the parent and acceptance of what has happened, and not pointing the finger back at the alienator or the parent when your child returns to you. That's not going to help at all. Your focus is rebonding with your child.
Right. Do you find that children that have grown up in these situations turn to relationships that tend to be abusive as well?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. And I often get asked that question a lot. And my response is, every child is different. There are some children that have more resilience than another child. A lot of that is, resilience is often inherited, and it can also be taught. Do some children later on turn to abuse or risky behavior? Of course they do. And then the parent that the child's reunited with can sometimes do everything possible in their uh, everything possible to help their child, and it can still turn out that way. But you know what? I believe that with the right tools and working with the right professionals, that healing can always take place. I've seen it with the kids that have been abused the worst, and they've turned out successful.
What are some of the, this goes into adulthood. How, have you dealt with adults as well that have suffered under this? And to what age have you seen this? Is it like 45, 50 years old, 60-year-olds?
Sure. I mean, that's an individual process as well. And I think every adult comes to terms in their own way what has happened to them. And if they were a victim of alienation, usually by the time that they are in their late teens or early 20s, they realize what has happened and what has gone on. And the best thing advice that I can say to anybody that has gone through this is you need to self-acknowledge to yourself what has happened and that you have been a pawn in a game. And that doesn't always feel very good. But the fact is that the parent that's alienating you is abusing you.
Right.
So you have a right to be angry.
And you got to flush it out and deal with it. And then, I know that forgiveness, I believe in the Bible, and I know that honor thy father and thy mother is very important. And part of that is the forgiveness. Nobody's perfect, and granted, both are going to make bad choices.
Yes.
And forgiveness really releases you from the harm that was done to you. And I know that's easy to say, but that has to be part of the solution.
It is part of the healing process. And look, you can forgive, but you don't forget.
Right.
I think forgiving is very healing for anybody. And because what it does is releases a lot of anger and pent up energy that you're holding so that you can move on and live a successful life. But forgetting, nobody forgets when they're hurt or abused or harmed. And you shouldn't have to forget.
Now, you've been on a few talk shows. Was it ABC or NBC or both? Or?
Yes. Yeah, I am a mental health contributor here in NBC 10 here in Philadelphia. And I do a lot of commentary on giving parents tips to help their children become successful. And mostly I do commentary on national news stories that have happened.
Well, we're glad that you joined us here. Do you have a website and a Facebook page too?
I do. My website is www.drsuenu.com, and on Facebook is Parenting Beyond Trauma, and I post tips on there every single week. Or you can just Google Dr. Sue Cornbluth, and all my stuff will come up. And my goal in life is to help parents fight parent alienation and regain custody of their children. It's a horrible thing to go through when you lose your child to the state or to a spouse and you've done nothing wrong.
That's generally one of the first questions I ask when people. I founded the Center for Redress because they killed our committee. So one of the first things I ask them, did you commit any crimes? Did you do any harm to the child? And when I'm convinced, and they also have to sign a release saying, I will let you do a background check so that we can do a thorough investigation. When I conclude that these people have done nothing wrong, then they've been violated, and their constitutional rights have been violated. And I think this is a nationwide, we have to bring this, because it's happening in Florida, it's happening in North Carolina, Texas, California, Pennsylvania. Steve Berter from Pennsylvania, New Hampshire. I thought it was just New Hampshire. I guess I was living in a cocoon. Right, well.
It's happening every day in the courts in my backyard in New York, in Alabama, every state in this country. There are parents that have been through this. And the main thing is with parent alienation syndrome is that the spouse who is doing the alienating becomes obsessed.
Right.
Obsessed with ruining the other parent And then the child just gets pushed aside, and the child is the one who's getting abused.
And the courts facilitate that. Is there any legislation pending that can change this? I know there are numerous amounts of Supreme Court decisions which say that parents, both parents, have a natural instinct for the child's best interest, and they have to be adjudicated unfit for that child to be taken away. I'm going to have some other guests on because some people say, well, follow the money. Is it really the money? Is it the Social Security money? Is it Title IV money? Do you know anything about that?
No, I don't know anything about laws that are being passed, although I know that there are many lawyers, some in the state of Pennsylvania, that are arguing to get parent alienation syndrome, get more attention on it in the courts and to be explained to family court judges in a way where they can understand what is happening.
Right. So a child, generally though, it is more healthy for a child to have both parents actively in their lives. If it's 50-50, that really does work in the best interest of a child, even though they've gone through a most difficult divorce.
Okay, yes, but it's always not in the best interest of a child to have both parents in their lives when one parent is abusing the child.
Right. Well, that's a given, sure. But one has to be recognized and has to be proven to be abusive.
Exactly, but when are the courts going to recognize that parent alienation syndrome is abuse? That's my question.
Right, and that's why we're here today. That's why. So I thank you very much for coming on the show. Is there another time that we can talk a little bit more in specific on details on how you actually deal with particular aspects of helping people?
Sure,
at another time.
I'd love to come on again and talk to your audience about specifically what I do and how I help people through the process so they get the best representation and the best chance for fighting for custody for their children.
Okay, can you say your website one more time for us, please?
Sure. It's www.drsueandyou.com. That is DRSUEANDYOU.com, and send me an email. I answer all emails that come to me.
Great. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for watching Speak Up, and we hope that this information helps you. We want to bring awareness. We're going to be doing a series of shows on parental alienation and other aspects on how this affects children and society. It is time that the courts start listening because the people are talking, and they've had it. And bad things happen when they don't listen, and they need to listen to the people. Legislatures, get your ears up because we are coming. We're going to be posting this everywhere. It's time you do something about this. Until next week, thanks for watching Speak Up. Thank you for watching this episode of Speak Up. We also want to thank our sponsor, Center for Redress of Grievances, LLC. You can reach them at www.centerforredress.com. If you want more information about Speak Up or want to be a guest, you have something to say, contact us at speakupnh@gmail.com. And thanks for watching. Until next week. Every day, citizens around the country are faced with new dilemmas that affect them profoundly. Whether it's injustice, discrimination, falling through the cracks, scandal and cronyism, balances of power, ethics, religious freedoms, state versus citizens, and unfunded mandates, and the list goes on and on and on. Welcome to Speak Up. It's directed at those who have fallen through the cracks, and it gives them a voice. It's your turn to speak up, to stand up and fight back. Thank you for watching this episode of Speak Up. We also want to thank our sponsor, Center for Redress of Grievances, LLC. You can reach them at www.centerforredress.com. If you want more information about Speak Up or want to be a guest, you have something to say, contact us at speakupnh@gmail.com. And thanks for watching. Until next week.